Welcome back to Once Upon a Voice, where every crime tells a story and every story leaves a scar. If you're drawn to the darkest corners of human nature and the emotions that drive people to the edge, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe because the next story might just stay with you forever.
October 15th, 1978. Riverside, Ohio, a blue-collar town where everyone knows everyone and secrets don't stay buried long. The amber streetlights of Elm Street cast long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. Detective Frank Morrison pulls up to 1247 Elm Street in his brown Ford LTD, the radio crackling with static as dispatch confirms the address. The colonial-style house sits dark except for the porch light, which flickers ominously in the crisp autumn air. Frank steps out, his breath visible in the cool morning air. At 6:47 a.m., the neighborhood should be stirring with life, coffee brewing, children getting ready for school, the familiar sounds of suburban morning routines. Instead, there's an unsettling silence broken only by the distant hum of the steel mill that employs half the town. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, the 67-year-old neighbor, stands on her porch in her pink bathrobe, clutching a tissue. Her eyes are red from crying. "He was such a good man, Detective," she whispers. "Charlie Rodriguez didn't deserve this. He helped everyone on this street. Just last week, he fixed my furnace for free when it broke down." Inside the house, the scene tells a story of violence. Charlie Rodriguez, 34, lies motionless in his living room. The paramedic firefighter who spent his life saving others couldn't save himself. The coffee table is overturned, a lamp shattered on the hardwood floor. There are signs of struggle, but something feels off to Detective Morrison's trained eye. 6 months earlier, April 1978. To understand Charlie Rodriguez's death, we must first understand his life. In the spring of 1978, disco music filled the airwaves. President Carter was dealing with energy crises, and in Riverside, Ohio, Charlie Rodriguez was building a reputation as the neighborhood's guardian angel. Charlie worked as a paramedic for Riverside Fire Department, pulling double shifts to support his family. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with dark hair and kind brown eyes, he had the sort of presence that made people feel safe. His 1974 Chevy Nova, always perfectly maintained, was a familiar sight on Elm Street as he came and went from his shifts at the firehouse. But Charlie wasn't just saving lives at work. When the Hendersons' teenage son got mixed up with the wrong crowd, it was Charlie who straightened him out. When Mrs. Chen's husband died and she couldn't afford groceries, Charlie quietly left bags of food on her doorstep. When drug dealers started lurking around the elementary school, Charlie organized neighborhood watch patrols. Charlie had this way about him, recalls Father Michael O'Brien, who knew the family well. He couldn't walk past someone in need without stopping to help. Some might call it a weakness, but I called it grace. The Rodriguez house at 1247 Elm Street was modest but welcoming. Charlie had purchased it in 1975 with money saved from working overtime shifts. The yellow colonial with black shutters featured a small front porch where Charlie would sit on summer evenings, waving to neighbors and keeping an eye on the street. Inside, the house reflected Charlie's careful nature. Everything had its place. His firefighter medals were displayed in a shadow box in the living room. Family photos lined the mantelpiece. The kitchen always smelled of the Cuban coffee his mother had taught him to make. But despite outward appearances of domestic tranquility, storm clouds were gathering over the Rodriguez household. May 1978. Charlie's world changed forever when he met Diana Vasquez at Riverside General Hospital. She was 28, a nurse in the emergency department with striking green eyes and auburn hair that caught the light when she moved. Diana had transferred from Chicago, claiming she wanted a fresh start in a smaller town. Their first encounter was professional. Charlie brought in a heart attack victim during a particularly busy night shift. As he provided patient information to Diana, their eyes met across the chaos of the emergency room. There was an instant connection, an electric moment that neither could ignore. "Your patient's stable," Diana said, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "You did good work out there." "Just doing my job," Charlie replied, but he found himself lingering at the nurse's station longer than necessary. Within weeks, Charlie was finding excuses to visit the hospital during his off hours. He'd bring coffee for the night shift, claiming it was just being neighborly. Diana would smile knowingly, and soon they were meeting for lunch at Murphy's Diner on Main Street. The affair began innocently enough, or so Charlie told himself. Conversations over coffee led to long walks in Riverside Park. Diana would listen intently as Charlie talked about his dreams of making the neighborhood safer, his plans to possibly run for city council someday, his desire to make a real difference in the world. "You're not like other men I've known," Diana would tell him, her hand resting on his arm. "You actually care about something bigger than yourself." But Diana harbored secrets of her own. She hadn't just transferred from Chicago, she'd fled. A messy divorce from a wealthy businessman named Robert Steele had left her bitter and calculating. She discovered Robert's affairs, his hidden assets, his plans to leave her with nothing. When she confronted him, he'd laughed and told her she was just another pretty face he'd grown tired of. That rejection had planted a seed of rage in Diana that grew with each passing day. She'd sworn she would never again allow herself to be discarded by a man. She would be the one in control next time.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Carmen Rodriguez, 31, had met Charlie in 1973 when he was fresh out of paramedic training. Carmen worked as a secretary at the courthouse, a quiet woman with dark hair and sad eyes who'd grown up in Riverside's Mexican-American community. Their courtship had been traditional, respectful, Charlie asking her father's permission before proposing with his grandmother's ring. They'd married in 1974 at St. Teresa's Catholic Church, with the whole neighborhood celebrating at the reception in the church hall. Carmen had worn her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her petite frame. Charlie had looked so handsome in his rented tuxedo, his smile lighting up the room as they danced to "The Way You Look Tonight." For the first few years, they'd been happy. Charlie worked hard to provide for them. Carmen kept their home immaculate, and they talked about starting a family. But Charlie's dedication to helping others began to consume more and more of his time. Neighborhood meetings, volunteer work, extra shifts, all in service of his vision of making Riverside a better place. Carmen found herself eating dinner alone most nights, falling asleep to an empty bed, waking up to find Charlie already gone to another early shift. When she tried to talk to him about spending more time together, he'd kiss her forehead and promise things would slow down soon. "Just until we get the neighborhood watch program established," he'd say. Or, "just until the drug dealers move on." There was always another crisis, another person who needed Charlie Rodriguez more than his own wife did. Carmen began to notice the changes in April. Charlie coming home smelling like perfume. Phone calls that he'd taken the garage, speaking in hushed tones. Credit card charges at restaurants where they'd never eaten together. The way he'd sometimes stare off into space during their increasingly rare conversations, a small smile playing at his lips. At first, Carmen convinced herself she was imagining things. Charlie Rodriguez was a good Catholic man, a pillar of the community. He would never, but the evidence kept mounting. The final confirmation came on a rainy Thursday evening in June. Carmen had decided to surprise Charlie with dinner at the firehouse, something she used to do when they were newlyweds. She prepared his favorite meal, roast chicken with rice and black beans, and drove to the station in their second car, a 1971 Ford Pinto. Through the large garage doors, she could see Charlie's crew cleaning equipment after a call. But Charlie wasn't with them. She asked Tommy Martinez, Charlie's partner, where her husband was. "He left about an hour ago," Tommy said, looking uncomfortable. "Said he had some errands to run." Carmen knew Charlie's schedule by heart. He didn't have errands on Thursday evenings. She drove home slowly, the carefully prepared meal growing cold on the passenger seat. When Charlie came home 3 hours later, he kissed her cheek absently and mumbled something about helping Mrs. Patterson with her plumbing. But Mrs. Patterson's lights had been off when Carmen drove past her house. July, September 1978. As summer burned into fall, the love triangle grew more complex and dangerous. Charlie, caught between duty and desire, began making mistakes. He'd promised Carmen they'd spend the weekend together, then disappear to meet Diana. He'd tell Diana he was working overtime, then show up hours late with weak excuses. Diana, meanwhile, was growing impatient. The small-town affair was supposed to be temporary, a way to rebuild her confidence and perhaps gain some financial stability. But Charlie's obvious devotion to his wife infuriated her. She wanted more than stolen moments and whispered promises. "When are you going to tell her about us?" Diana would demand during their clandestine meetings at the Riverside Motel out on Route 9. "It's complicated," Charlie would reply, running his hands through his hair. "Carmen's been through a lot." Her father just died, and she's been helping her mother. I can't just. You can't just what? Be honest. Be a man. These arguments became more frequent, more heated. Diana threatened to call Carmen herself, to show up at the house, to tell everyone at the hospital about their affair. Charlie would calm her down with promises he wasn't sure he could keep, buying time while he tried to figure out how to navigate the impossible situation he'd created. Carmen, for her part, was conducting her own investigation. She'd hired a private detective, Jim Walsh, a former Riverside police officer who specialized in divorce cases. The retainer fee had come from her secret savings account, money she'd been putting aside from her courthouse job, thinking she and Charlie might use it for a down payment on a bigger house someday. Walsh was thorough and discreet. Within 2 weeks, he had photographs of Charlie and Diana together at Murphy's Diner, walking hand in hand through Riverside Park, kissing in the parking lot of the hospital. The images were black and white, but the betrayal was vivid in its clarity. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rodriguez," Walsh said as he handed her the manila envelope in his cramped office above Martinez hardware store. "I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." Carmen stared at the photographs for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. The woman was beautiful, more beautiful than Carmen had ever been. Younger, more sophisticated, with the kind of confidence that came from growing up with opportunities Carmen never had. "What's her name?" Carmen asked quietly. "Diana Vasquez. She's a nurse at the hospital. Transferred here from Chicago about 6 months ago." 6 months. The same time Charlie had started coming home late, started being distant, started looking through her instead of at her during their increasingly strained dinner conversations. Carmen paid Walsh's final fee and drove home to the empty house on Elm Street. She sat at the kitchen table, spreading the photographs out like a tarot reading of her marriage's death. In one image, Charlie was laughing at something Diana had said, his face animated in a way Carmen hadn't seen in years. In another, they were holding hands across a diner table, leaning toward each other, like conspirators sharing secrets. That night, when Charlie came home from his shift, Carmen was waiting for him with the photos spread across the coffee table in the living room.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
October 10th, 1978, 5 days before the murder. "Sit down, Charlie." Carmen's voice was steady, controlled, but Charlie could hear the steel underneath. He looked at the photographs scattered across their coffee table and felt his world tilt. "Carmen, I can explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me for months? That while I've been trying to save our marriage, you've been building a new life with her?" Charlie sank into his recliner, the brown lazy boy they'd bought together for their second anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was about to lose everything while sitting in a chair that represented happier times. "It's not what you think," he said weakly. "It's exactly what I think." Carmen picked up one of the photographs, Charlie and Diana kissing under the streetlight outside Murphy's Diner. "How long, Charlie? How long have you been making a fool of me?" "Since May." "But Carmen, it's not. I never meant for this to happen." "Since May." Carmen repeated the words like she was testing their weight. 5 months. 5 months of lies. Charlie looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. Carmen had lost weight. Her face was thinner, her eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. She was wearing the blue dress he'd bought her for their 4th anniversary, the one she'd saved for special occasions. Somehow, this felt like the most special and terrible occasion of their marriage. "Do you love her?" The question hung in the air between them, like smoke. Charlie opened his mouth to lie, then found he couldn't. "I don't know." Carmen nodded slowly, as if his honesty was another nail in their marriage's coffin. "She's beautiful," Carmen said, studying another photograph. "Sophisticated. Everything I'm not." "Don't say that. You're beautiful, Carmen. You're good and kind and boring, and predictable, and not enough to keep my husband interested." Charlie started to protest, but Carmen held up her hand. "I have something to tell you too, Charlie. Something I found out yesterday." Carmen walked to the kitchen and returned with a manila folder. She placed it on the coffee table next to the photographs of betrayal. "I've been to see a lawyer. I know about the insurance policies, the savings accounts, the property deeds. I know exactly what I'm entitled to in a divorce." Charlie felt cold suddenly. "Carmen, we don't have to." 50% of everything, Charlie. The house, your pension, your life insurance policies. Everything we've built together over 5 years of marriage. She paused, studying his face. Or everything you thought you built while you were planning to throw it all away for a woman you've known for 5 months. The conversation continued for 2 hours. Carmen presented evidence of Charlie's deception with the methodical precision of the court secretary she was. Phone records showing calls to Diana's apartment. Credit card statements revealing dinners and hotel charges. A detailed timeline of Charlie's lies about working overtime. By the end, Charlie was devastated. Not just by being caught, but by seeing the pain he'd caused the woman who'd loved him faithfully for 5 years. "I'll end it," he promised. "I'll tell Diana it's over. We can work through this, Carmen. We can go to counseling. We can—" "No." Carmen's voice was final. "It's too late for that. Please. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you." Carmen looked at him with something that might have been pity. "If you loved me, Charlie, you never would have started this in the first place." October 12th, 1978, 3 days before the murder. While his marriage was imploding, Charlie Rodriguez was fighting another battle entirely. 3 weeks earlier, he'd made a decision that seemed simple at the time, but would ultimately provide investigators with a compelling false lead. Charlie had decided to buy a car for Carmen, a peace offering, perhaps, or maybe just a way to ease his guilt about the affair. He'd always promised her that when they had enough money saved, he'd buy her something newer and more reliable than the aging Ford Pinto she drove to work each day. Riverside Motors, located on the outskirts of town near the interstate, specialized in used cars and questionable financing deals. The owner, Tony Marconi, was a heavy-set man with gold teeth and a reputation for sharp business practices. His lot was filled with cars that looked better than they ran, and his sales tactics relied on pressure and misdirection. Charlie had visited the lot on a Sunday afternoon in late September, drawn by an advertisement in the Riverside Herald for a 1976 Buick Skylark. The car was powder blue with a white vinyl top, exactly the kind of car Carmen had admired when they'd driven past the Buick dealership in the city. "That's a beautiful car," Tony Marconi had said, appearing at Charlie's elbow like smoke. "Low mileage, one owner, a little old lady who only drove it to church." Charlie knew the line was a cliché, but the car did seem to be in good condition. The interior was clean, the engine sounded smooth, and the price, $3,200, was within the budget he'd calculated from their savings. "I'll need to think about it," Charlie had said. "Tell you what," Marconi replied, sensing hesitation. "You put down $500 today. I'll hold the car for you for 2 weeks. Give you time to get financing arranged." Charlie had written the check, taking Marconi's business card and a handwritten receipt. 2 weeks later, when Charlie returned with the remaining $2,700 in cash, the Skylark was gone. "Sold it yesterday," Marconi said with a shrug. "You didn't call, didn't come by. I figured you'd change your mind. But I gave you a deposit. You said you'd hold it." Deposit was to show good faith. Wasn't a binding contract. Charlie felt his temper rising, the same protective anger that flared when he dealt with drug dealers on Elm Street or bureaucrats who wouldn't help struggling families. "I want my money back." "Can't do it. Deposit's non-refundable. Says so right on the receipt." Charlie looked at the crumpled piece of paper Marconi had given him. In tiny print at the bottom, it did indeed say the deposit was non-refundable. "This is fraud," Charlie said, his voice rising. "This is business," Marconi replied. "You don't like it, call a lawyer." The argument escalated quickly. Other customers in the lot stopped to watch as Charlie's voice grew louder, more heated. Marconi's 2 employees, both large men with the look of ex-cons, moved closer to their boss. "You people come in here thinking you can intimidate honest businessmen," Marconi said, his own voice taking on an edge. "Maybe you should learn some respect." "You people." Charlie's anger spiked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means." For a moment, it looked like the confrontation might turn physical. Charlie's hands clenched into fists, his face flushed with rage. But his paramedic training kicked in, the ability to de-escalate situations, to think clearly under pressure. "I'll be back," Charlie said finally. "And I'll have my money." "Don't bother," Marconi called after him. "And don't come back here threatening me." Charlie drove home in a fury, his mind already working on how to get his $500 back. He called the Better Business Bureau, the State Attorney General's office, and finally a lawyer friend who specialized in consumer fraud. The lawyer, David Chun, son of the widow Charlie, had helped with groceries, agreed to write a strongly worded letter demanding return of the deposit. When that didn't work, he threatened to file a lawsuit. 3 days before his murder, Charlie received a phone call at the firehouse. Tony Marconi was on the line, his voice different, nervous, almost apologetic. "Look, Rodriguez, maybe we can work something out. Come by the lot tonight after we close. We'll settle this like gentlemen." Charlie agreed to meet Marconi at 8 p.m. on October 14th. He never made it to that meeting. October 15th, 1978, the day of the murder. Charlie Rodriguez woke up at 5:30 a.m., as he had every morning for the past 10 years. The house was quiet. Carmen had been sleeping in the guest bedroom since their confrontation 5 days earlier. They'd barely spoken since then, exchanging only necessary information about schedules and household matters. Charlie made coffee in the kitchen, standing at the window that looked out over Elm Street. The neighborhood was still dark, but he could see porch lights beginning to flicker on as people prepared for their day. Mrs. Patterson was already outside, collecting her morning newspaper in her pink bathrobe. Everything looked normal, peaceful. There was no sign of the violence that would shatter this quiet street in just over an hour. Charlie's shift at the firehouse wasn't scheduled to start until 2 p.m., but he'd been picking up overtime whenever possible. The extra money wasn't for Carmen's car anymore. It was for the lawyer fees he knew were coming when she filed for divorce. At 6:15 a.m., Charlie poured his coffee into a travel mug and headed for the garage. His 1974 Chevy Nova was parked next to Carmen's Ford Pinto, but they looked like strangers now. Two cars that happened to share space, but no longer shared a purpose. As Charlie backed out of the driveway, he saw Carmen watching him from the bedroom window. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass. There was something in her expression, not anger, not sadness, but something else. Something that would haunt him in the few minutes he had left to live. Charlie arrived at the firehouse early, hoping to catch up on equipment maintenance and paperwork. The morning was routine, checking the ambulance supplies, reviewing incident reports from the previous shift, discussing staffing schedules with Captain Rodriguez, no relation, despite the shared surname. At 6:45 a.m., Charlie's pager buzzed. There was a text message, unusual for that time of day, when most people were still getting ready for work. "Need to see you. Important. Can't wait. D. Diana." Charlie stared at the message, his heart sinking. He'd been trying to end things with her since his confrontation with Carmen, but Diana wasn't accepting his decision gracefully. Charlie used the firehouse phone to call Diana's apartment. "We need to talk." Diana's voice was urgent, almost breathless. "Diana, I told you. It's over. My wife knows everything. That's why we need to talk. I have something to tell you about Carmen. Something you need to know." "What are you talking about?" "Not over the phone. Meet me at the usual place." The usual place was Riverside Park, at the gazebo, where they'd shared their first kiss. Charlie looked at his watch, 6:50 a.m. He had time before his shift started. 10 minutes, he said. "But this is the last time, Diana. After today, don't call me again." Charlie drove to the park in his Nova, his mind racing. What could Diana possibly know about Carmen? And why was she being so mysterious about it? The park was deserted in the early morning light. Charlie could see Diana's car, a red 1975 Camaro, parked near the gazebo. But as he walked across the grass, he realized Diana wasn't alone. Carmen was there, standing next to Diana, near the wooden structure. Both women turned as Charlie approached, and he saw something in their faces that made his blood run cold. They'd been talking. About him. About the affair. About things Charlie couldn't begin to understand. "Hello, Charlie," Carmen said quietly. "Diana and I have been having an interesting conversation." What happened next would take investigators months to piece together, and the truth would prove more shocking than anyone in Riverside could have imagined. Diana Vasquez wasn't just Charlie's mistress. She was Carmen's salvation. The two women had met 3 weeks earlier, not by accident, but by design. Carmen, armed with photographs and information from a private investigator, had approached Diana at the hospital. Instead of the confrontation Diana expected, Carmen had made a proposal. "I know you're sleeping with my husband," Carmen had said calmly, cornering Diana in the hospital parking lot after her shift. "And I want to make a deal with you." Diana, prepared for tears and accusations, was caught off guard by Carmen's businesslike demeanor. "What kind of deal?" "The kind that makes us both rich." Carmen had done her research thoroughly. She knew about Diana's messy divorce in Chicago, her financial struggles, her bitterness toward men who made promises they didn't keep. She also knew something Diana didn't. that Charlie had a $100,000 life insurance policy through the fire department, with Carmen as the sole beneficiary. "He's going to leave you," Carmen had explained matter-of-factly. "Men like Charlie don't divorce their wives for their mistresses. They just make promises they never intend to keep. Trust me, I've been married to him for 5 years." The plan Carmen proposed was elegant in its simplicity. Diana would lure Charlie to an isolated location for a confrontation about their relationship. Carmen would be waiting there, armed with Charlie's own service revolver, the .38 he kept in their bedroom safe for protection. They would make it look like a robbery gone wrong, or perhaps like Charlie had stumbled into something dangerous while trying to help someone in the neighborhood. The car dealer situation provided perfect cover. Investigators would assume Tony Marconi or his associates had killed Charlie to prevent the lawsuit. $50,000 Carmen had offered, half of the insurance money. Enough for you to start over anywhere you want. Diana had been hesitant at first, but Carmen's arguments were persuasive. Charlie was never going to leave his wife. Diana would eventually be discarded, just like she had been in Chicago. This way, they both got what they deserved after being used by selfish men. The morning of October 15th, everything went according to plan. Diana called Charlie, claiming she had important information about Carmen. Charlie, driven by guilt and confusion, agreed to meet at the park. But Carmen wasn't there for the confrontation Diana expected. She was there with Charlie's gun, her fingers steady on the trigger, her mind made up about what needed to happen next. "I know about the insurance money," Diana said suddenly, realizing too late that she'd been manipulated. "You planned this from the beginning." Carmen smiled coldly. "You were always going to be loose ends, both of you." The shots echoed across the empty park. 2 shots, fired in rapid succession. Charlie Rodriguez, the hero of Elm Street who'd spent his life saving others, couldn't save himself or the woman he'd betrayed his marriage for. Carmen calmly wiped the gun clean and pressed it into Diana's lifeless hand, creating the scene investigators would find hours later, an apparent murder-suicide between 2 lovers whose affair had gone tragically wrong. But Carmen had made one crucial mistake. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who collected her newspaper religiously at 6:30 every morning, had seen Carmen's Ford Pinto leaving Elm Street at 6:20 a.m., 25 minutes before Charlie's estimated time of death. When Detective Morrison interviewed her 3 days later, Mrs. Patterson mentioned seeing Carmen's car, assuming she was going to work early. "Funny thing, though," Mrs. Patterson added. "She came back about an hour later, but she looked different. Upset, maybe. Not like herself at all." That detail, combined with forensic evidence from the park and inconsistencies in Carmen's alibi, would eventually unravel her perfect plan. Carmen Rodriguez was arrested 6 weeks after her husband's murder, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial lasted 3 months and captured national attention as details of the elaborate love triangle and insurance fraud scheme emerged. The prosecution painted Carmen as a cold, calculating woman who'd orchestrated the perfect crime, manipulating both her husband's guilt and his mistress's desperation to achieve her goal of financial freedom. The defense argued that Carmen was a victim herself, a devoted wife driven to temporary insanity by her husband's betrayal and the discovery of his affair. The jury deliberated for 4 days before finding Carmen Rodriguez guilty on both counts. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tony Marconi, the car dealer whose fraudulent business practices had provided the perfect red herring, was also investigated. While cleared of any involvement in the murders, his dealership was shut down for consumer fraud, and he served 18 months in federal prison for tax evasion. The house at 1247 Elm Street stood empty for 2 years before finally being sold to a young family who knew nothing about its dark history. The neighborhood watch program Charlie had worked so hard to establish continued without him, led by volunteers who remembered his dedication to making Riverside a safer place. Detective Morrison, who'd spent 6 months untangling the web of deception, would later say that the Rodriguez case taught him never to assume anything about people's capacity for both love and evil. Charlie Rodriguez was trying to be a hero, Morrison reflected years later. But sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we should fear the most. In the end, Charlie Rodriguez's greatest act of service to his community wasn't saving lives as a paramedic or organizing neighborhood watches. It was serving as a cautionary tale about the deadly consequences of betrayal, greed, and the assumption that we truly know the people we love. The amber streetlights still cast their shadows on Elm Street, but they seemed a little darker after October 15th, 1978, the day Riverside learned that evil doesn't always come from strangers in the night. Sometimes it lives in the house next door.
Thanks for watching. If you found this story gripping, there's more where that came from. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chilling case. And if you have theories or thoughts, drop them in the comments. We read them all. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.